So we left off in the Kuzari with the notion that prophets are a different state of being than regular human beings. Correct? Do you remember that? Yeah. Because prophets can do certain things, their bodies can do certain things that our bodies cannot do, which means that they are almost as a different species. I say that metaphorically. And really in this week's Parsha, we learn a very important principle. Spiritual entities that come into the physical world act physically, and physical entities that enter the spiritual world act spiritual. That's how it works.
Wait. So spiritual entities that enter the material
angels, right? The angels come to Avraham Avinu, and they eat, and they drink, and they walk, and they talk, and they, the whole thing. Right? They act physical.
They're entering the spiritual realm.
They entered the physical realm. Yeah, they have to behave according to the rules down here.
Yeah.
If, however, one of us would enter in his physical state the spiritual realm, then your body, your physicality will begin acting spiritually.
So,
where do we learn that from? Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu went up, right? He entered the spiritual realm in physical form. And there, how long did he stay there? 40 days and? 40 days and 40 nights. Did he eat? Did he drink? Did he go to the bathroom? Did he take a nap? Did he sit? Did he stand? All those things, we understand that once you enter the framework of the spiritual, then we act differently.
So Jews don't believe, we don't believe in ghosts and stuff, spiritual presence on earth that isn't physical.
That is a separate discussion, which I don't think we need to get into right now. Mm-hmm. But that could be a very interesting sort of a mishmar type of talk. Mm-hmm. On Thursday night late, you guys had a few beers. Then we talk about ghosts in Judaism. But now, what's the point? There's light out, Now, yes, did you want to say something?
Yeah, so prophets are really, even though they seem like they're in the physical world, they are in the physical world, but at points, they're really in the spiritual realm when they're receiving prophecy.
Yes, they have what I would call a built-in genetic modem to connect to the spiritual realm that other human beings don't have. No, it's not it's not external to them. It's internal to them. So well, you need the Wi-Fi. You need the whatever. What's the software that allows you to connect to the Wi-Fi?
And hardware. You also need a modem.
So that's the idea. The Wi-Fi is let's say the spiritual realm. But in order to connect to it, you need a piece of software. And
where can I pick one up?
So Yehuda Halevi said last time that you were born with it.
But can I get one?
You have it.
You have it.
Everyone has it?
Every Jew has it.
But prophets are the ones that can turn it on.
No. All Jews are potentially prophets. You have this ability. Why does he say that? Because remember, the event at Mount Sinai was a prophetic event. They experienced spirituality. They experienced God.
So instead of God coming down and talking to them, they all kind of just went to the spiritual realm.
No, God doesn't come or go.
Yeah.
They experience. When you say God comes to them, they experienced Him. Yes.
When the physical body goes to the spiritual world, is it physically still in the physical world?
No.
It's no longer.
No, it doesn't act like physical reality.
So Moshe, when for 40 days and 40 nights, he wasn't in the physical world.
Correct.
His body was in the physical world.
Correct.
But prophets, when they have visions, they're in the physical world.
Correct. The body stays, but their mind is not. It's sort of out of body
There are
experience.
two ways of getting connected to this spiritual world. One is
That one is Moshe Rabbeinu. No one is.
there.
But you had others. You have Daniel in the fire. You have other prophets. We have in the prophets that did miraculous things with their body. The question is, how could they do that?
But they were in the physical world.
Correct. But because they are spiritual, then the effects of physicality on their body did not affect them.
So what happened to Moshe Rabbeinu's body?
I don't know. Doesn't say. But what we know is we came down, his face was shining to a point where people couldn't look at him. It was that.
Did his face shine for a long time, or did it?
Yeah, no. He had to have a cover. He worked with like a burqa,
A mask.
a mask.
For the whole
Yeah.
time? Is that
Yeah.
why he became celibate?
No, he was celibate before that, but that's for a different reason. So we finish this. Then remember, the king says to him, to make up the story of an event that took place, that didn't take place, is going to be very, very hard to convince a mass amount of people that it took place. So then he says, the rabbi says, Abraham himself lived during the generation of the Haflaga, right? There was a time before that the world was sort of divided, and he says, and he and his family members all spoke the lashon, the language of Ever, which is, we usually translate that as Hebrew, right? Lashon HaKodesh. And do you remember the story? We just read it in the Parsha, right? That they were trying to build the Tower of Babel, right? And God essentially changed their language. And from there on, all these other languages developed. It's not so simple to understand what that is. Probably what it means is that there was one common language that everybody spoke. And from that point onwards, there were other languages. There was a basic common language, but people stopped using it and developed their own languages. Okay? And it's interesting that those languages fall into what we would call family languages, right? Semitic languages, Indo-European languages, Hamito, which is the Egyptian type of languages, and you have the African languages, and you have these family of languages that come out from one from another. They're similar. So he says, and Avram was called Ivri, Hebrew, because he spoke this language. And Moshe came after him about 400 years later. And the world then, society, was full of knowledge of the heavens and the earth. What does that mean? It means, if you know anything about ancient history, the Egyptians and the Babylonians, already in that period, knew very well about constellations and the stars and the way that the heavens work with eclipses. They knew, and we have books that go back that far back. We're not even talking about India. I'm just talking about the Babylonians and the Egyptians. And he says, and he went to Pharaoh and the wise of Egypt and the sages of Israel at the time didn't believe him wholeheartedly. Right? Because you remember he comes to them and said, God appeared to me in a burning bush. And they're like, what are you talking about? Prove it. What are you talking about? And what does the Chumash tell us? That Joseph left a code word. You ever heard, there's in America, you have to do this. Unfortunately, that, kids, when you send them to school, you teach them a word that's a code word, so that if you as a parent can't pick your child up, and you send somebody to pick them up, that adult has to use a code word. Then the kid knows that that's okay, that this friend of my dad or my mom has the right code, and I can go with him and it's okay. Why? Because there are people who would come and say to the child, your mom said for me to pick you up, get in the car. And then the kid is lost forever. So there is this code word. So Yosef says there's going to be a code word. There's going to be a guy who's going to come and say, Pakot Pakadati, that God will come and save us. And comes Moshe Rabbeinu, and Hashem tells him, use this code. And he comes and he does this, all these tricks, and then he says to them, gives the code word. And they're like, That's what our parents always told us. That, there's going to be a guy who's going to come and use this code. And this code, we know that we can trust you. So, he says they didn't really believe him completely that the Creator speaks with human beings. Why?
That's impossible.
It's not a question of impossibility. It is not something that happened, at least,
In their lifetime.
yeah, right? They were in Egypt, 200 and some odd years, right after Yosef dies and all the brothers. That's it. There's no communication between God and them, as far as we know. Then all of a sudden, so one generation, 2 generations, whatever it is, and here comes the guy. Says, God spoke to me. You're like, I don't know. Yes.
They weren't monotheists, right?
Were they monotheists? It's a good question. The answer really appears, there are multiple midrashim that talk about this. Some of them worshipped the idols of Egypt, but some of them didn't. Remember, they are living in the most sophisticated, most advanced society at the time. The pyramids were there for 1,000 years already.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if 1,000, but close to, if you look it up.
Yeah, if they built that.
They didn't build it. The pyramids were like ancient.
Really, before?
Yeah.
What? So who built it?
The Egyptians built it. The Torah says we didn't build the pyramids. We built storage cities. We didn't build the pyramids. Anybody who tells you the Jews built the pyramids, say, I'm sorry. Let's do the math. Look up, the pyramids. I think it's the old kingdom that the pyramids were built. This is the new kingdom. There's, I don't have Egyptian history that clear in my mind to recall, but I can look it up and bring it. But you can look it up too.
I was under a false impression, no?
But
I thought it might have been after.
What? No, the pyramids were long. The pyramids were there for a long, long time. For a long, long time. So they're coming in a society that had these things, that there's most advanced weaponry, everything you can think of.
For the time.
And they say, these are the gods, this is it, and you're like a slave. Well, what do you know?
You said, what did we build?
Like storage cities. Storage.
Storage city.
Yeah, the place to store foods and all sorts of other things. That's what it says. The Chumash says, Arei miskenot. That's storage. So the Torah does not say we build the pyramids.
Yeah.
If it did, it'd be very easy to say, come on. But no, it's a historical fact that the Bnei Israel were in Egypt at the time, that the pyramids were built a long, long time ago. So, the Jews also had their doubts. The Egyptians certainly. And they didn't believe him, the Jews didn't believe him only after the 10 Commandments. Why the 10 Commandments? Because the first 2 commandments they heard God giving to them. Right? What's the best proof? Like when you say somebody comes and says, hey, I could fly. Let's see you fly. Right? And that's when Hashem spoke to them, not only can Moses fly, but so can you. Now you're like, yeah, I guess you can do it. What?
So how do you do it now?
How do I do it? I levitate. But I bump my head in the ceiling all the time. I was speaking to a group of guys who were just, sort of just thinking about exploring Judaism. And I said to them, if I just stood in front of you and I said, okay, I'll show how I can levitate if you all sign up to stay at yeshiva for, 3 months. They're like, really? Like, yeah, I'll levitate, I'll show you. And they're like, okay, go. No. It's like, no, the thing is, like, people think of it, like, really, that's going to be, like, if we produce miracles, that's what, is going to convince you that you should have a relationship with God, you should live a moral life, and you should live with a life of meaning. I need to, no, it shouldn't. It shouldn't.
There's people in like India and places where they do
La briut.
No, I'm not saying. No, they do.
Talking about miracles, like sometimes miracles happen to people and they're like, they start believing in God then.
But I'm sure the world would be a different
That's
place
okay.
if people could actually meditate. If there's
It's not
scientific
supernatural.
evidence.
Nah, they're used to it.
Huh?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, okay, you come out, it's against the odds, but it's known to happen. But it's known as a miracle. However, if someone starts flying around in the sky,
Right.
then
Sure.
that's something else.
It's called
It's evolution.
superhero. Hey, take a lap.
Super Moshe.
Okay, so he says that these Egyptian scholars, right? He says the Egyptian scholars knew about lots of different things about the stars, and that they investigated all sorts of things to find out whether things are true or false. That is, even back then, he says, the Kuzari says, don't think that only in our generation people investigate what is true and what is false. Always, in every generation, there are people who spend their time trying to figure out what's the pshat and tosfot. Kidding. What's true.
Scientists.
Yeah. So he says, and they would figure out what is the line, what is it. Now, how is it? So he says that now I'm going to ask you a question. Is it possible that they would imagine that the languages that were before them, right, within a span of 500 years, right, to go from the Tower of Babel to Moshe in Mitzrayim is about 500 years. 500 years. It's not that long. Right? To us, it's like 500 years ago. Wow. But not necessarily in the span of, what we're talking about. So he says, how would they look at all the information that Moshe Rabbeinu brought down in the Torah? What is he saying? He's saying if you read the Torah, right, it talks about Noah had 3 sons, and this is related to this, and this is related to that, and this guy had this guy, and this guy had this guy, and these people went to the south, and these people went to the north, and these people lived here, and these people lived here. They had this language, they had this language, right? And then he was only 500 years removed from that. Nobody would have believed him if this was not true. Nobody would have believed Moshe Rabbeinu when he brought down the Torah if it wasn't true. But they all agreed. He says all of these things. And he says, is it possible for a person today to verify for us, for our generation, a lie, right, to check out if this is a lie or true, with regard to the nations around and what their languages are, if it's a period of 500 years or less? Would it be possible? And the answer is yes. Yeah, you could figure this out. What is he saying? He's saying that if you look when the Torah came out, nobody argued against it. Because that was the representation. He's not making this stuff up. He's not making all these things up. He says, yeah, that's not, the king says, Ze lo yitachen, it's not possible. And he says, we find wisdoms within manuscripts that are older than 500 years. So he says, and we can see that there's writing, there's different languages, all those things existed in that time period, which we know. We still are discovering artifacts from that period that people had different languages. So the rabbi says, so how would they not argue against Moshe Rabbeinu? And why if he were wrong? That is, if there was no flood, if there was no Shem Cham V'Yefet, all these things that he says about society, nobody's saying, listen, I read your book. Nonsense. Nonsense. That's not what I heard. It's not what I heard. If you read a history of, let's say, history of England, the last 500 years, right? Go 500 years back, and what happens in England in 500 years ago, so 1500. Okay? That's one historian will tell you this is what happened. You read another historian, they say, that's what happened. Different perspectives. What the Kuzari is saying is you look at the information that the Torah provides, people were still remembered, had traditions, could investigate the things that he was saying about the different languages and the different people. And nobody called on him and said, Wait,
what was that?
What was that? What was what?
You're saying like people.
The argument that the Kuzari makes here is that the Torah has certain parts that provide what I would say history of humanity. Correct?
Yeah, so like in Judaism, like after Sinai, it wasn't like there wasn't a gap between the beginning of Judaism. At Sinai, everyone like Judaism pretty much started.
Correct.
So it's like from there, like.
So he's asking why didn't anybody argue with him about the beginning chapters of Genesis?
Yeah.
Basically, it was, if you
Maybe
think back,
they did.
if you think back to 500 years ago, there's known facts that we know today. However, if you go back 1,000 years ago, there's things that historians debate over and say, oh no, this isn't right, this is the burial place of king whatever,
Yeah.
you know, that type of thing. So therefore, 500 years ago, there's very few people that deny that Shakespeare was Shakespeare. There's only a handful that say that it was someone else.
I don't think it was.
So that's the same type of thing. You know what I mean? They were just thinking back, 500 years ago, we know that this happened to this certain people because we've heard about it. And we've got seen documents and all that type of thing. So it's similar type of thing.
Why would they?
I was thinking, think back 1,000 years, now there'll be more doubt.
Why would we carry a tradition where they argued, or why would they argue if maybe they were all into the same tradition?
But the whole point that what Moshe Rabbeinu wrote down was widely accepted.
It was like a standard bit.
Everybody said, yes, check.
By the group of people who shared a history already?
No, everyone.
But no, it's about everybody. All the nations are mentioned in the Torah.
So other nations don't dispute it.
Yeah, nobody did. The Egyptians don't say, what are you talking about?
How would we have known if they did?
So that's what we're going to get to. So the Kuzari says, this makes sense. That nobody argued against Moshe Rabbeinu. So then the rabbi says, do you think that languages have a beginning or don't have a beginning? So now think about this. Where do languages come from? Do they have a beginning?
They have a beginning.
They have a beginning?
From pictures.
What?
Pictures?
Pictures.
Drawings.
Hieroglyphs.
Whoa.
Oh, drawing.
Oh yeah, we'll call it hookah.
Symbols.
Yeah, exactly.
They have a beginning. They must have a beginning.
You sure?
No, I'm not, but I'm going with it.
So he's asking this question. And the king says, languages do have a beginning, and they are conventional.
Remember, this is the king talking.
Conventionals means that a group of us come together and we agree that certain sounds are going to mean X and certain sounds are going to mean Y. Like book means Gemara means this, right? And there's something sort of conventional that there's nothing necessarily in the word cup to refer to this. Right? There are other instances that a cup means something else. Right? If I said to you when you're walking on the football field or soccer field, I said, hey, where's your cup? Right? Are you going to run to the locker room and bring me one of these?
I would.
You would?
I don't know anything about it.
Then I think you'd be. You should play goalie. just.
That's worse.
What?
That's worse.
That's why I would do it. Yeah. Right, you get what I mean, right? That words. Okay. So he says, we see more al zeh chibura min because, and we also see there's some universal aspect to language. That languages are made up of nouns and verbs, right? Parts of speech. I don't want to hurt anyone's, mind when you talk about grammatical formulations. People get, really, really nervous. So says the Kuzari, and it's based upon something that we call consonants. What are consonants? Different sounds that we make with our mouth or different parts of our body. There's certain gutturals, right? Labial, dental, different sounds we make in different parts of our mouth, in a sense, okay, and throat. But that's universal. So the rabbi says, have you ever seen or heard of a person making up his own language?
Yes.
Today we have to say yes. He says no, but you know why, which language that we're going to say yes?
Hang on.
That's one.
Tolkien,
Lord of the Rings.
Elvish.
Also
You've
that-
never had a Lord of the Rings
I
before.
heard of Lord of the Rings.
Also
He
the
was the
Savant
author
guy.
of Lord of the
What?
Also the David Tennant or Tennant.
Ebonics.
He's making a.
No, Ebonics is not a lang.
This is for the medium of.
He wrote an actual language.
That only he knows.
But
So-
also people have used it.
What?
People use
Star
it.
Trek.
It's crazy.
So here, back then they would say, and maybe there is a difference that I'm not, fully clear on with regard to language here. But he seems to say, he says, I've never heard of anybody making a language up completely. Because language is something that is passed down from generation to generation. And there wasn't sort of a day that you get a group of people who say, we're all going to start one language today, everybody. And maybe that's the difference. Like one person making up a language for himself, okay, whatever. But it's not like you get 10 guys who are going to get in a room and say, okay, we're going to make up our own language. And and they sit in a room and develop a whole language and they're ready to go. That we're not going to say. Now, so he says, have you also heard of a people or a nation that divide the week differently than Sunday through Shabbat? That is in 7 parts. And there is no natural order in nature to get 7. It's not the natural cycle. It's very odd. It doesn't fit. And he says, how is it that people all the way in China and all the way in the West, everybody does this they didn't get all together, everyone got together and said, okay, we're going to divide a week into 7 days. And today is day 3. And everybody agree? Everybody, okay, then, huddle, go. You go that way, you go this way, you go this way, just keep counting the days. And, when you call China, you don't say, hey, what's day of the week for you? It's like, week? What's a week? We divide our weeks by every 2 days. What do you mean 2 days? We agreed on 7 days. I don't know what you're talking about, buddy. For us, it's 4 days. Every 4 days there's a week, No, everybody has got 7 days. How is that? Where does that come from? Pretty interesting,
Can't think of anything.
right? So unless there was a source for all humanity to start out with one language that has a certain formation of nouns and verbs and sounds and days of the week, right? And he says, I guess it's not possible without an agreement of everybody. And that would be very, very difficult to accept. unless we say that everyone is the descendants of Noah and that they received this from their father. Otherwise, I don't really have an explanation for this. Now remember, this is not proof. This is just asking you, is it reasonable to say this? Is it reasonable to say that since you have, all languages have basic same components, all societies have the 7 days a week, or where do they come from? Is it reasonable to say that comes from Noah? That's all. Are there other possibilities? Maybe. Does it mean that those possibilities therefore nullify this? No. It just means that, is it reasonable? And the idea is, yeah. What was their basis for believing in God? It was not because of this. It was because of their religious experience. But as the rabbi is explaining Judaism, he says, look, there are aspects that the Torah sort of sets down and tells us about humanity that are still in effect today. And we really don't have any explanation of why it is so. Very interesting, right? Let's keep going. So he says, that's what I wanted to hear from you, that it's reasonable. And he says, and if you take the numerical system, right, 10, everybody agrees about the numerical system. Whether it's the East or the West, everybody understands with the number 10, right? Going from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, coming back. Everybody understands this. You're puzzled.
Think about algebra.
What about algebra? It comes from the Muslims.
Yeah.
But it's based on the decimal system. Yeah?
Or like Aramaic numbers.
What?
Or Aramaic numbers.
No, the numeral system, he's just talking about the concept of
Based on
tens.
10 fingers, yeah, 10 fingers you can count in.
but base
What?
3 is more naturally the better way to.
What is it?
Your brain registers as base 3 much more quickly. Like if you see a group of whatever, your brain goes first 3.
Oh, really?
Groups 3.
I don't know.
I didn't know that. But I'm not going to argue because I just saw you 3 and then you 3. And he's missing one, so there's only 2 of you. And Binyamin is by himself, poor guy. Okay. So the Kuzari says, but what are you going to do with, your religion with what the people in India are saying? The Indians claim that they have cities or buildings that are hundreds of thousands of years old. That's what they say. Isn't that a raya against you? You're saying the world is 4,500 years old. These people in India are saying, listen, I don't know what you're talking about. This building has been here for 100,000 years. How are you going to explain that? So the Kuzari, the rabbi says, this would be a problem for my belief system if it was in a nation or in a book that everybody agreed upon. But they don't agree upon this themselves. This one says this one says that. I don't know. You guys figure out yourselves what the issue is, and then let me know. So he says that's really not going to, he says there's nothing really clear about what they say. And they anger one another with the claims that they make with regard to their own idols. Some people say that the idols are good. Some people say they're not. Some say this book was written by God. Some people say no, this is written by human beings. This is that. There are all sorts of traditions that are coming out of India that I don't know what's pshat. I don't know which one is. I can't make heads or tails with it. So I put them all in one category and I say, I don't know. So it doesn't really bother me. So says the king, okay, so you want to tell me about this culture that they have? What are you? He gave me a good answer. Fine. What are you going to do with the philosophers? The philosophers study, analyze, use logic, right? And they agree that the universe is eternal, right? And that it is not only tens of thousands, not thousands of thousands, it has no end and no beginning. What are you going to do with that, Rabbi? So what do you think?
Same
What's he gonna
answer as
say?
The Indians. They're all differing and different opinions.
So he says, no one can blame the philosophers. He's being, what? Kind to the philosopher. Why? Because a philosopher is missing something, whereas the Indians have something. The Indians have multiple traditions, and hence those traditions cancel one another. But the philosophers have no Masorah, no tradition. And so they try to do the best they can with what they have. Which is what? They're noggin. Let's stop here for Mincha, and we'll continue Be'ezrat Hashem tomorrow.